Hello there, everybody. Another week, another gig. Here is Simon. As always, welcome back to our React Native live coding series. Tonight, we are actually going to be working on our component library. We will carry on from where we stopped last week. And last week, we actually managed to get it all installed. We created a new repo, mono repo, where we installed Storybook, and we started adding the stories and the packages. I actually did a bit of a cleanup before this stream just to make sure that everything works. I'm actually going to take you through all the changes that I did, so you guys know how exactly I structured everything. Let me bring back all of the necessary things. Let me just get it from my second screen. So here is our storybook. Let me just refresh it so you can see how it works. So this is what you see in the web browser, and this is what you see in the actual simulator. So you can see that there is a button. You can open the navigation, and in the menu you can actually see what kind of components, what kind of stories we've got available in there. Right now it's only a button with a text variant, and this is all we've got right now, but we will definitely add more. We will add more to it. So yeah, so that's pretty much it, which is pretty cool. I think we actually managed to get it into a very satisfying state. Let me check the health of the stream and everything. Only so I've got it all open for you guys. I am going to share the stream on my social media, just so other people can watch us. Let me put the font size up so you guys can see what I'm doing. Yeah, cool. Let's put it back up to 125%. I'm actually going to have it right here because we don't have our store in there, so I can have it like this, which is perfect. Right, so let me actually put it on my Facebook. Alright. Going to put it on page. Sorry guys, just going to quickly post it on YouTube and Twitter. Right. Okay, Perfect, brilliant. Right, so let me go through all of the changes that I've done since last week. Maybe we can start with the folder structure and how it all works, just so you guys are aware. As you remember, last week we couldn't get it to work with the dynamic require method. We wanted to load our stories dynamically based on certain regex. This is in package.json. There is our config object where we actually specify where the loader should be looking for the stories, and then we just pass the pattern, and the output file goes into this location, this path. So then within our source folder, we've got a Storybook folder, and this is where we have all of our configuration for this Storybook. So this file gets generated automatically based on the regex that we specified, and it just requires all of those stories dynamically in there. So then we can use it within our Storybook. So this is our index file for Storybook, and I just keep it simple. I quite like to have the configuration set in a separate file, and this is where it is. So we import configure from Storybook React Native, and we import the load stories from the story loader, and then we use that method directly in the configure function, and then we export it so we can use it within our index.js file. But I'm actually wondering if we could do this. There we go. So we can use a shortcut to configure it because it's a function itself, so we can just pass it as a callback, and it still works quite nicely. So then this configure file is used right there. We can set some decorators and stuff, but I'm not gonna be talking about this today. So then within the stories folder, this is where I have our stories, and there is, so before I put it directly in the button, and I'm still considering what's the best practice, because one, I quite like to keep it separate from the actual package, because Storybook is just kind of a separation of concerns, and I quite like to keep things separate from each other, you know, like, because the button itself is gonna be a standalone package. I don't want to mix it with the story from Storybook. Instead, I want to keep the stories within the Storybook, so I know what goes in there, and whenever someone imports the package, they wouldn't see the story for it, because this is not the place for that story to live at. And I believe the stories should belong to the Storybook. Therefore, I've got those stories directory in there, and this is where I specify all of the stories, right? So within the stories, what we do is basically importing React, obviously, because we're going to be using certain React and React Native features, and then I import some custom common views that I'm going to be using for the stories as well, because I quite like to have this centered view and top view and other bits and bobs in there, just so it kind of gives me this view out of the box. And then I import the actual file that is needed for this particular story, and this story is all about the button. So I imported the button from the packages, and that button is going to be, can actually do this just to make it simpler, because there is the index.js file, so I don't have to do /pattern/pattern. Instead, I can just download it directly or import it directly from the index file. So now we're going to be adding more variants to that button, and we're going to be kind of styling that button out. So we are going to be focusing on that button to have more variants based on certain props, and yeah, and then kind of extending the component library to make sure that we've got everything covered. So if I'm just gonna go back to gonna open a new Google Chrome window where I'm going to go to React Native button. So you see, this is the button that we get out of the box from React Native. Now, it has a couple of things. It has a couple of props that we have to use, or we want to use. So it has to have a type, which is a function. It's got the onPress prop, which is a function, and it's required. And then it also has the title, which you display within the button. So this is how it goes. Now, what happens if you actually want to have something else within that button? What actually happens when you want to put some other children in that button? What if you want to have like the icon, or if you want to have a loading spinner, or you actually want to put something else within that button? What do you do in that case? Well, with this particular React Native button, you cannot do much, to be honest, because as you can see, it's fairly simple, and it only gives you like the basic functionality out of the box. And what we want to have is something custom. So we want to rebuild our button component to make sure that it's actually going to support what we need. So instead, I'm going to have a view in there, and then we can have a view like this, which supports children. So we're not going to have a title. I'm going to remove that prop. By default, we still want to keep the type to text, so that it wraps the children like so. Instead, otherwise, if it's not a text, we can return the children so whatever is passed down, we can just return it, right? And as you can see right away, there is the style change straight away. Also, the onPress is not going to work on the view component anymore, so we will have to use something like either detachable opacity component from React Native, or we will have to use the highlight component or something else. So for now, I'm going to give it some basic styles. So we can create a new. Oh, sorry. I'm actually importing the styles from the styles file. So for now, let's just keep it like that for now. And I'm going to put the detachable opacity. Detachable opacity around it. And then we can move the onPress prop over there, like so. So now you can see that the entire button is clickable, and the detachable opacity actually gives you that nice touch and feel of a pressable component, right? So when you click, something happens. Now we can actually pass a proper on press console log pressed. So now you can see that in the terminal it's being console logged. I'm actually going to start debugging it remotely so we can see that everything is going to be displayed in our console down below. As you can see, just seems to info errors. Actually, maybe this is a good idea. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Right, so you can see that you can pass the on press to the button. We can actually remove the title now because it's not going to be needed anymore. And as you can see, there you go. So you can see that the button still works, and it's a text button. Although it's a text button, it kind of has this weird background color. So what we want to do, we want to get rid of the primary color or the background color because we don't want it there. We can either set it to transparent to make sure it's transparent. Then what we are actually going to do is that we are going to have different variants. So we can specify it in a bit actually. So getting back here, this is what it is. Now, if you want to replace this guy here, the children of the button, and pass something else, you can also do that. So you can do like view, whatever it is. Then another guy could be like text, and another guy could be something else. So you could definitely just pass it down as you like. But let's keep it like this for now. Then what we want to do is to have a different type, right? So as soon as the type changes, we want to reflect accordingly. We want to display a different variant of that button. So let's say I'm going to have a type. Let me actually so type, and then I'm going to call it primary. Whoops, primary. Let's just put the props on different lines, just so it's nice and clear, like so. Okay, so now the type is primary, but because it still says click me, to be honest, I'm just going to change it all to have it wrapped like so. And there you go. So now we have a type. Okay, so now we pass the type, which is primary. We should probably define what kind of types we've got available, and we can use prop types, one-off type, or one-off. Wondering if we can actually define kind of enums for this, but I would have to Google it or double check if it's possible to define the enum for that particular string. But for now, let's just keep it as a string. So then what you want to do is to have that kind of option to define different types, right? So you want to have some sort of conditions, and if type equals to primary, for example, and do something, okay? Or you can have a switch statement or whatever else. But for now, I'm just going to have the if statement here, and then we can refactor it later. We can always come back to it whenever we get more time, or when we feel like it's not a good solution anymore. So what we want to have, we want to kind of combine the styles, and based on certain conditions we want to replace the styles. So what we could have is this kind of thing, type styles, and then based on this type styles we could just define the styles here, right? And then whenever you use the style, you could just do this, type styles. Well, so this is one way of doing it. Another way of doing this will be to define it in our styles. So basically we could have our button there, but then we could have our primary button styles, where we could just define the background color set to styles, colors, primary, and well, let's say we want to set the padding. We want to set the padding on all of the buttons, because if you put two buttons next to each other, even though it's a text button, you still want to have the same kind of height and you know, the same kind of spacing around the text. So you have to have the padding set to both. So then we can set the color to styles grayscale white, for example. So then we can get it from. Then we can do it like this, for example. So you can see, here we go. Wondering why the color is. Oh, sorry. The color has to be set on the actual text, so we can't set it there. So the color has to be set on the text, so we would have to do the exact same thing for text. So this is one way of doing this, and then obviously if you have more types, you just provide more kind of more if statements. Another way of doing this will be slightly different. So whatever the type is, as you can see, the type equals primary, and this is what we call it in our styles object. So instead of doing that, we could actually take a bit of a shortcut, and we could say we could do something like this. So we could say that this is the base kind of styling, and then we could use the S object and pass the type down to it. So it would just save us a bit of a time. There you go. So you can still see that it gets the primary object from there. But what happens if there is no type provided, because we don't have the text type provided, right? Well, there you go. It still works, because if it's not there, it would just pass it as null or undefined. So you still kind of get the button styles, and it still knows that it's a text style, which is by default. So it's quite good. And we can have the primary Now, what if we want to have another style? So we can add secondary in there. Boom. And then we can define secondary. And you can see how it all changes. To be a bit more descriptive, or to actually see all of those different changes, oops, you can, so we could have this as text, as we already had it. So actually no, I'm gonna keep it simple. Then this is gonna be the secondary button, but we could also have a primary button there. So you can see that now we have 3 different stories, or 3 different variants of the same story, because there is one button story in there, and we can switch between different variants like so, which is quite cool because you don't have to change it manually every single time, or change those props. You can just change it in there and see how it works, which is brilliant. So then the next thing is going to be the text, because we want to have the text in whatever colors for whatever variants, right? So there are a couple of things of doing this. We could do either we can do it either like this, so we define 2 different objects within the same kind of variant, like so. So then the container would have the background color and the text would have a color set to white. Just gonna copy it over there and replace the background color here. So then we will of course have to go back to our styles, and then because we know it's the exact same type, but we need to specify if it's a container or something else. So then for text we do the same thing, which is define as type, which is as primary or as secondary text. Oops. And this is because so this is because the style sheet creates it in a CSS kind of manner, but what we could do is this. So we could just export a plain object. Primary, secondary. Okay, so now because the text input doesn't have its own object, like here, it cannot find it, right? So this is a little problem here, because we don't specify the text, because the text type. The text type is default. So we could either add it there, we could either have the container and the background color could be, so we could just grab it from there, transparent, and then the text could have a color set to styles, grayscale, black, for example. So as you can see, that fixes it for us, because now we have all of those kind of types defined, and it's good because there is no misleading anywhere. And as you can see, the text now is in white, which is great for everyone we specified, and the text is actually black without any background colors. So this is one way of doing it, and it's still quite clean and reusable. So we have 3 variants, and it's all based on the type we specify. So whatever we pass right here gets displayed, and by default it's just a text. Now what we want to have is what I was talking about earlier, is that we should have kind of types specified somewhere. So we should know that there is only one of those strings. So it either could be primary, secondary, or text. And text is by default. So we have to find a way of like specifying this type here, and because the button itself should be like, I mean, the package itself should be kind of a spec itself. So by opening the button component, you should be able to look at it or look at the props and be able to tell that, right, you know, it kind of takes the type, which is a string, but it only can be one of these, right? It cannot just be anything. So let's go and see what prop types gives us out of the box. And if there is anything like that already specified in their docs. So there you go. So there is the optional enum, and you can see that there is the array of limited options. So we want to use that, right? We want to have this kind of thing. Whoops. Add it to our prop type. This is it. So we specify what exactly is needed. So now, there you go. We've got one of those props. Let's try and see if we can add a different type. If it's going to notify us about it. It hasn't. Ah, there you go. So, okay. So one thing is that we haven't got the styles for it, but even if we did, so let's just add the props. Sorry, the properties in our CSS, just so we have this available and we can see if it's there. So we've added it here, but I'm not gonna save it just yet. I want to show you something. So you can go through your warnings or your errors, and you can see that there is a warning that the prop failed, and the prop type has a value of tertiary, which got supplied to the button, and the prop types expected one of those 3, and the tertiary is not there. So even if I save it, and we go to the secondary button, you can see that there is a warning down below or in your console saying that the prop value has been incorrect, or has been provided without actually being specified in the prop types. So if we want to do it, if we want to add it, we can do it right there, or we would have to remove it completely from our story or from our app, right? So that's why the props are kind of useful. Tertiary. It looks like the styles are actually the same for tertiary and secondary. There you go, which is a bit weird. So I'm going to do... I'm going to open the color palette and make sure that we've got a different color for our tertiary variant. I can just add a couple of the colors that we used before, and this is going to automatically kind of calculate it for us. So I can lock this one, I can lock that one, and as soon as I press, whoops, didn't lock the first one for some reason. There you go. So now when I hit space, it just generates random colors for me, so I can see which ones look okay-ish. So I think this is going to be good for our tertiary color. So again, if I go to our tertiary color, now we have our tertiary variant in there, which is great. Now, another variant that I want to use is like kind of a reversed version of this button. So I want to be able to have the same coloring, let's say, but with like white background and only the border on it. So by doing that, we could just add another button right here, and the type would be, I would call it tertiary, but I would give it another prop, which would call it hello, or outlined, maybe outlined, something along these lines. I'm actually going to put it in the alphabetical order. So okay, now we have to handle something else in here, right? So now we have to handle it if it's outlined. So outlined, this is going to be a boolean, and by default it's going to be false. It tells you that it's been never used, it's been defined but never used before. So now we want to have a way of specifying, for example, so if it's outlined, use whatever as type outlined, for instance. Otherwise we can use the container, and the outline is going to be coming from the props. So we can do it like this, for example, based on that prop, based on that boolean, we could have some sort of condition here saying, hey, if it's outlined, just change my styles to the outlined ones, otherwise change it to the container. And we could just add it there, where the background color in this case would be white, but we want to have the border width equal to 1, and the border color we want it to be equal to primary. Now let's see if that works. It's probably gonna error because we don't have sorry, I need to go to tertiary. Yeah, so oh sorry, haven't saved it there. So by default it's false, and it goes to the container one. Whoop. That's the thing. So we can't see it. Hold on. Border width. Outlined. Border color. Border width. Do I need anything else? Feels like I feels like I need something else. Let me actually see. Border color. Border color, border width. Yeah, that feels. Oh, that looks alright to me. Oh, I see. I see what the problem is. So we actually added it on the tertiary color. So that should be tertiary, and this should actually be tertiary as well. Because sorry, this should be white, but the text is going to be tertiary. Cool. So now you can see that we've got two buttons, one which is just normal, and the second one is the outline one, where the text is still white, so we can't see it, so we will have to fix it. But there is another problem. So you can see that because it has a border, it's kind of wider and taller than the normal primary button. So we can fix it in two ways. The first way would be by adding it to color transparent. We can kind of hack it by providing a transparent color to the basic styles, to our main styles, and then obviously we will change it per component, right? So there you go. You can see that the border width has already 1 pixel on every single button. So the size equals. We also need to find a way. Well, we need to find not find a way, but we have to define our outlined text color, right? There is actually something I'm gonna be changing here. So instead of having those different, this is one way of doing it, and it's fine. There is nothing wrong with it. We could actually add another object here called probably outlined text, and then we can change the color to styles, colors, tertiary, for example. This is just one way of doing this. Not saying which one is the best yet. And also you can always experiment yourself with it. You can always find the best way that works for you. So you don't have to really just stick to outline text, to whatever I'm saying. If you feel that there is something better to use, or a better way of doing this, it's absolutely fine. So this is one way of doing this, and as you can see, I've achieved two kind of variants of the component. Well, actually three. Well, actually four, but then each of those can have those multiple options, right? So even though it's a text like this, we might have another option of that text if we wanted. But then, for example, we want to have that kind of hollow look of the button or of the component that we've already built, And this is one way of doing this. Obviously, there is always, it's always better to kind of define your constants or those conditions up here, so it's easier to read. As you can see, the more we add to the style property, the uglier it looks and the worse it will become to maintain. So we can always do something like this, and we can just pass it down, and then we can say text styles, and then we're just going to define it up there, just so it's nice and clean. Another way of doing this would be probably by defining a constant called styles, and then we can have a container here, and then text, which is probably gonna be even cleaner. We need a comma right there. So we can define it like so, which is actually quite nice, because the styles object has the access to the props, and based on those props we can just switch between different types or different styles. Oops, it looks like I've broken something. So let's see what happened there. Okay, so there is a typo. It's weird. It doesn't lint it for me because it's within an object, so probably linter isn't that clever, or I would need to set an extra rule to detect it, right? But as you can see, it still works, which is great. Now we could have another component for grouping buttons, and that's how I probably would do it. Otherwise, we could just use the view in here. So we could use view here to define the flex direction set to, whoops, oh lord, direction to row, and then once we need to get that view of React Native, obviously, because otherwise we can't not use it. No. Right, so it tells us that there shouldn't be any inline styles, but this is only for demo purposes, so I can show you that this is how we could do it. So we could just have those two buttons next to each other, and it all depends on the designs. Obviously, I'm just kind of doing it ad hoc, and I'm kind of defining those components as we speak. But it all depends. So now, for example, we could create another package called button group or buttons group or grouped buttons or whatever. And then instead of defining those styles everywhere, we could just use it like so. Grouped buttons, and this would just group them the way we like. So we could have some custom styles in there, and we actually could focus on developing and styling it within its own component. So hopefully this has been useful for somebody. We don't have much time left. We only have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to add it all to our repo. Storybook plus dynamic stories plus button component. So I'm going to check it in. I forgot to put a to-do here. That's fine. Basically, to-do would be to refactor this to create another component, another package where we create group components or group buttons. Another thing would be to refactor maybe this slightly, because as you can see, I could probably just name it better. And yeah, because this has outlined text, outlined. Would have to think of a better way of naming this just to keep it cleaner. If you have any ideas of how this could be refactored or how this could be named better, leave a comment down below the video, and I'm pretty sure we can discuss it in the comments, or we can have a chat in a private message, which is, you know, whatever suits you better. So this is it for now. This is it for this week. Next week we are going to be producing those packages as standalone packages, and we're going to be creating a mono repo, proper mono repo, and publishing it to npm, just so we have those packages available, and just so we have the entire library available to our React Native app, because we want to start using those components from within our app, right? And make sure that it still works, and make sure that it's still reusable. So we want to actually use it in practice, but at the same time, it's good that we've got those things. So you can see we can either navigate from the web between the components, which is very nice. You can see that the variants are down there. So we're going to be focusing on the mono repo, but also we're going to be displaying the props in here. We're going to be showing what props are available and what variants are available. So for example, the button itself will show what kind of props are there, which are required, which are not, what variants can be passed on. So that's going to be next thing. Obviously the dream is going to be to have all of those components and the story is kind of dynamically driven, so that we could change the props on the fly and see how changing the props changes the component. So instead of having all of those different variants up here, we would have only one button variant, but then we would have the props down here, which we would just change ad hoc, you know, and those props would actually re-render the button component or any other component to show what the changes are and what the props do to the actual component. So this is going to be our long run goal, to have that kind of component library which is very dynamically driven, or as dynamically driven as possible, and so that we can have everything visible from the component library, from the Storybook point of view, and then whoever is going to be playing around those components from the Storybook level, they will be able to change some props and see how those components react to them, which is, you know, it's kind of interactive, and also it shows the actual component in use and how it's going to be used, and it shows all of different options that the component will have. So even for non-technical people, it's going to be quite simple and nice to watch. So if you like the video, don't forget to leave a comment and do like the video, and also please do subscribe to our channel, because we will have more of this live coding series coming up every week, and there is going to be more kind of short videos to follow as well. We want to have those kind of short tutorials to share with you guys, to make sure that that we share our knowledge, you know, between each other, and that we can have the kind of community around coding in general, because this is how we get the technology better as well, and that's how we become better developers together with you guys. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. Hopefully see you next week, and this is it for now. Bye for now.